Hello and welcome to Scream Theory. So I've been practicing to Ben Duerr of Shadow of Intent for like 3 years now because he's my favorite vocalist and Shadow of Intent is my favorite band. I've listened to every one of their albums at least 50 times and I've covered quite a few of their songs. If you check out some of my vocal covers, I think most people would agree that I'm getting a pretty similar sound to Ben. One thing I don't think many people realize is that Ben actually changed his vocal style after the album Reclaimer. So if you listen to Reclaimer and everything before that, including his work with his old band Hollow Prophet, he was using his old vocal style. And if you listen to Melancholy and Elegy, the most recent two albums by Shadow of Intent, he sounds like he is doing something very different than what he used to do. It may be difficult for some people to hear because Ben is going to sound like Ben no matter what technique or screaming style he does, the same way I'm going to sound like me no matter what style I do. But if you listen very closely and past the unique elements of a person's voice, just solely try to listen to the distortion and the quality of the distortion in their voice, then you can hear that Ben does sound very different between his old and his new vocal style. So I want to talk about both his old and his new vocal styles because they both sound really good, and it also highlights the complexity of all of these metal vocal techniques. But before we get into that, I just want to quickly summarize the anatomy of distorted vocal techniques, just to make sure that we are all on the same page here. Alright, so these images are from Brandon Kennedy's 2017 endoscopy, where he performed various metal vocal techniques while being scoped. The top of the image is the back of the larynx, and the bottom of the image is the front of the larynx. In this image, the space between the vocal folds is open. This space is also referred to as the glottis. Here you can see the true folds, and slightly above or superior in the larynx is the false folds. And even higher up in the larynx than the false folds is the arytenoid cartilage. And so the true chords let us perform fry screams, and the false chords let us perform false chord screams. Because the true chords are under the false chords, we can actually perform both false chord and fry screams simultaneously. Now, in this image, Brandon is performing a false chord scream, but notice how close together the arytenoid cartilage has come. They've come so close together that they're completely obstructing the view of the true chords and the false chords. During false chord screams, we can actually get the arytenoid cartilage to come so closely together, and depending on how we position our larynx and how we direct our airflow, we can actually get the arytenoid cartilage to rumble around and vibrate and produce noises. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find any endoscopy footage of someone performing isolated arytenoid cartilage-based sounds. There just hasn't been enough endoscopies performed on metal vocalists. But there have been many metal vocalists who have gotten really good at using their arytenoid cartilage to scream. Now, the reason why I just showed you all of that is because Ben's old technique for performing lows was using false chord and fry screams simultaneously. But his new method of performing lows is primarily using his arytenoid cartilage. Let me show you the difference in how these two techniques sound.
Spreading disease, temperatures are puffing before my eyes, violence and infection, and joys are mad in the mind, in everything, yes, upon the reclaimer. Blood in the sands of time, the ageless clock is counting down, the purveyors and crusaders by God live unrenowned. I shall never bow to imagined tyrant. Obsessed with me, beauties, or shall not bow to thee. Hear the noise and reject the sun. The raging fire blazing up at Titan's sword. I declare you the soon to be departed, unspeakable atrocities shall come to light.
So let's start with his old vocal style. What Ben used to do was primarily fry screaming and false chord screaming simultaneously, especially in his lows. His low-pitched fry scream was creating this like sharp and thick undertone that was like the foundation of his lows and really filled in the space, whereas his false chords vibrating above his true chords added this like rougher and gurglier overtone. And when you listen closely to his lows, you can definitely hear both of those things going on at the same time. For his highs, it sounds like they are mostly fry screaming, maybe a tiny bit of influence from his false chords vibrating, but mostly sounds like he's fry screaming in his highs. Learning to do his old style of lows was really difficult for me because low-pitched fry screams are my area of weakness. But even with my not super great low-pitched fry screams, I'm still able to get a similar sound. What really helped me figure out his old style for doing lows was practicing to the first line in the song Battle of the Maginot Sphere. Something about the way he was pronouncing the words in that line and just generally the way it sounds just really stuck out to me, and it was able to help me imagine what I need to do to produce a similar sound. And I know that sounds strange, but the crazy thing about metal vocals is when you're trying to learn somebody else's vocal style and they are very, very advanced, you can't really even imagine what they're doing or how you could even begin to do that. But sometimes you find a single line in a single song where they do it in such a way that it almost is like cracks in the armor, that you can almost visualize like, wait a minute, I feel like I could kind of do that if I try and practice and I can get close to that. So whenever I find a line or even a single word sometimes that I feel like I could mimic that, I could recreate that given enough time and practice, then I simply just practice that over and over and over again. So I started off by just mouthing out that first line in the song using my soft low-pitched fry scream. And when I say soft low-pitched fry scream, I'm talking about like just the quiet fry screaming distortion that a lot of people figure out how to do before eventually learning how to project it and make it sound really powerful and more like a scream. I'm talking about this.
The Battle of the Maginot. The Battle of the Maginot. The Battle of the Maginot.
So from there, I started adding just a little bit more power, a little bit more airflow and efforts into that, allowing my vocal cords to vibrate more to produce a louder and more powerful sounding distortion with the fry scream. And then from there, I started adding my false chords to it.
The Battle of the Maginot. Ooh, oh, oh. The Battle of the Maginot. The Battle of the Maginot. The atrocity of your madness to the earth. Vibrating.
So practicing to that first line in that song really helped me get even somewhat comfortable with that style of doing lows. It helped me get my foot in the door. And from there, I started to hear more lines into other songs that would stick out to me that I felt like I could recreate or mimic given enough practice. So that's how he produces the distortion of his lows and gets that quality of sound. It's just a really good, thick, powerful, low-pitched fry scream with some engagement of the false chords rumbling around above the true chords. Now, there's definitely instances where he leans more into a false chord scream to make it sound more gurgly, or leans more into a fry scream to keep that really rich and thick-sounding undertone more prominent. But generally, most of the time, he's doing both techniques simultaneously. As you get better at screaming this way, you'll probably be able to hear those little nuances of when he's leaning more into a false chord or more into a fry scream. But the way he pronounces his words when doing his lows adds a lot of uniqueness to his voice. He has this method of drawing out his vowel sounds and pronouncing them with a very tube-like mouth shape. I think a really good example is the breakdown of the Mad Tyrant's betrayal. My judgment is clouded by madness of the mind.
I thought I never deserved, but rather you imposed. My judgment is clouded by madness of the mind. It's not that I ever deserved, but rather you imposed.
And then another thing that he used to do a lot with his lows in Shadow of Intent's older stuff and his stuff with Hollow Prophet was using the tunnel throat positioning to make his lows sound like really smushed and rancid. And he didn't really use it too much in Melancholy and Elegy, but the tunnel throat positioning is simply you just take your tongue, pull it up in the back, curl it, and then put it down in the front behind your bottom teeth like this. And it has a very drastic effect on your voice.
Darkest walls with my fears. Before my eyes are reparated on to slay. Making the pieces, resurface, and making pains. The other imaginations of their minds are an enigma. It's a chaos. You're almost desert.
So now let's talk about his old style for doing highs, which was predominantly high-pitched fry screaming. His false chords may have been vibrating a little bit, adding a little bit to the overall sound that he's getting, but I would say the bulk of the distortion and quality of his sound is the fry screaming distortion. And the way that he's pronouncing his words is really consistent with the pattern of pronunciation that most people who do high-pitched fry screams use. His highs used to sound very sharp, tight, and screechy, with these quick, abrupt, and harsh transitions from syllable to syllable or consonant sound to consonant sound. And I think the best way to communicate this is just to show you. First, I'm going to do it in a soft, high-pitched fry scream so you can kind of hear the essence of it. And then I'll do it with a full power, high-pitched fry scream.
I have lost all I had. Everything I am. Everything I once was now a shadow on the ground. A memory that couldn't be anything more than sorrow and fury. I have lost all I had. Everything I am. Everything I once was now a shadow on the ground. Memory that couldn't be anything more than sorrow and fury. In mockery, sentinels gather encompassing the grill. My destiny profound. Desperation clings to my every breath. Leeways to them. Chilling sensation massages my cerebra. The demon's wrath. In mockery, sentinels gather encompassing the grill. My destiny profound. Desperation clings to my every breath. Leeways to them. Chilling sensation massages my cerebra. The demon's wrath.
And occasionally he would also use the tunnel throat technique with his highs. He doesn't really do it on Melancholy and Elegy, but in their older stuff he would use it every now and again. A really good example is that high in the middle of the breakdown of The Heretic Prevails.
I will not hurt. Dismemberment is immediate.
And so that's what I feel is mostly different about his old vocal style compared to his new style. With his old style, his highs were predominantly fry screaming, and the lows were predominantly false chord and fry scream at the same time. Now, in his new vocal style, it sounds like for his lows, he's using his arytenoid cartilage most of the time. He definitely uses his old style for lows occasionally, but the majority of his lows absolutely sound like they're coming from his arytenoid cartilage. So when the arytenoid cartilage vibrates or rumble around and produce noise, it has this dense but also hollow and meaty sound to it. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to start on my false chords and keep them vibrating and then switch into vibrating my arytenoid cartilage so you can hear the difference and hear when that transition happens. Now, when I switch to the arytenoid cartilage, it feels as if I am pushing my tongue significantly farther back and down into my throat, as if I'm trying to pull my larynx down even further. It also feels as if there's a lot more muscle activity in the top half of my larynx, like I am contracting some laryngeal muscles a lot more than I normally would with false chord or fry screaming. For some people, it's really hard to figure out the right positioning to make your arytenoid cartilage come together so that they can rumble around and vibrate, but try these steps. So what we want is to contract the muscles in the back and lower portion of the tongue. It's very similar to how you would normally position the tongue for most low-pitched screams, but with this, we want to make sure we're getting a good and forceful contraction of those tongue muscles. You can try taking 2 fingers and placing them 1/2 inch to 1 inch above your Adam's apple, and when you're contracting those tongue muscles, you can almost feel them just kind of pop into your fingers. I also find that curling my tongue up and back like this helps me get a better contraction of those muscles, but it's not required. Then you want to try to open up the area at the top of the throat and the back of your mouth, very similar to yawning. And while you have that big open space in the back of your mouth, you then want to imagine you're trying to funnel the sound down to a fine point by narrowing your mouth. Simply just pucker your lips while maintaining that big open space. And then lastly, I like to tilt my chin towards my chest. You can already hear how much deeper this is making my voice, and I feel like it helps me get a better contraction of some of the anterior muscles in the neck that further help to pull the larynx down. So we're going to be contracting those tongue muscles in the back, opening up the back of our mouth, narrowing the front of our mouth, and tilting our chin towards our chest. So then just try speaking while you're in this positioning, and you should be producing the lowest pitched voice that you possibly can.
Oh, hello, this is my low-pitched voice.
So in this positioning, try using your true chords, try using your false chords, get a good idea of how it feels to use both those different structures, but then you want to try to use your arytenoid cartilage. And it's gonna kind of feel like you are trying to make the airflow collide with a structure just slightly above the false chords. And like I said, it feels as if there is a lot more muscle activity in the top back part of my larynx, as if I am trying to squeeze or constrict or kind of just force those 2 ball-shaped arytenoid cartilage structures to come closer together. You can also just try to imitate these sounds. Oftentimes, when a person first learns to use their arytenoid cartilage, they are able to get a few rumbles going, but they're not able to reproduce it super consistently or keep the rumbles going very consistently. It's not the easiest thing in the world. Just like all the other metal vocal techniques, this one is going to take work as well. In my experience with using my arytenoid cartilage, I found that I can produce some very rumbly and gurgly sounding distortions, or I can produce a lot smoother of a distortion. For the gurgly guttural sounds, I'm not pushing a ton of air or generating a ton of air pressure, but it also feels like I am contracting those muscles in my larynx like the most I possibly can. And honestly, the gurgly sound, I can't do it for longer than like a minute to a minute and a half before those muscles in my larynx literally just start to fatigue. It's not painful or uncomfortable or anything. It feels like, you're at the gym and you're doing some bicep curls and now your bicep muscle has reached failure. It kind of feels like that in my laryngeal muscles. And for the smoother sound, it feels like I am pushing significantly more air, but my laryngeal muscles are relatively more relaxed than they would be for the gurgly sound. They're still contracting to hold my arytenoid cartilage in that positioning, but I'm not contracting them as hard as I would be with the guttural gurgly sound. Now, that guttural, gurgly distortion from the arytenoid cartilage is how Ben achieved that insane sound in the first verse of the song From Ruin We Rise.
Where the men used to come for the drinks, where the children would play endlessly, they have taken everything. They know not what tomorrow shall bring.
And now here's that same example while layering it with my high-pitched false chord screams.
Where the men used to come for the drinks, where the children would play endlessly, they have taken everything. They know not what tomorrow shall bring.
And throughout the rest of the song, he just switches to using the smoother sounding distortion, but that's what he does for most of his lows on Melancholy and Elegy.
Cry, cry, from squalor in me rise. They rape what they've sown.
And so the arytenoid cartilage lows have a very meaty sound to them. It sounds like bigger, heavier tissues are moving, because that's what's happening. The arytenoid cartilages are larger than the false chords or the true chords. And I suspect that Ben probably already knew how to use his arytenoid cartilage to some degree, maybe not fully isolating them, but somewhere after the album Reclaimer, he must have figured it out and decided that that's really the type of sounds that he wants to go for in their newer albums. But it's not like he completely gave up doing his old technique. On Melancholy and Elegy, I definitely hear certain sections where he uses it, but if I had to guess, I would say he's using the new style with his arytenoid cartilage 70 to 80% of the time, and only 20 to 30% of the time he's using his old technique. And similarly, Ben also changed the way he does his highs, where it sounds like he used to primarily use fry screaming for his highs. Now it sounds like he is most of the time using his false chords for his highs. The majority of the high screams that he performs on Melancholy and Elegy, you can hear the fluid, wet distortion sound created by the vibrations of his false chords. Now, his false chords are vibrating very, very quickly, so it may be difficult to hear, but if you listen closely and if you're familiar with the sound of the false chords vibrating quickly, you can absolutely hear it. A good example I like to point to is the part of the song From Ruin We Rise when Ben screams, "Tell me why, yo, why?"
Tell me why, yo, why?
Or at the end of the song Embracing Nocturnal Damnation when he says, "Living as waste, dying a slave, a fate most deserving, their debts shall be paid."
Living as waste, dying a slave, a fate most deserving, their debt shall be paid.
But there are still plenty of instances on Melancholy and Elegy where Ben has a tight, screechy sound in his highs, especially when he's screaming words very quickly. So this is most likely him still using the fry scream. But Ben is really good at false chord screaming, and when you practice false chord screaming for long enough, eventually your false chords can vibrate so quickly, and depending on the way you position them, you can produce a screechier, tighter sound with the false chords. You can produce tones with the false chords that most people wouldn't identify as coming from the false chords. So there are actually a lot of instances on Melancholy and Elegy where he does have like a screechier, tighter sounds in his highs, but they are still high-pitched false chord screams.
Ah, ew, ew, ew. Their voices died one by one as they called my name. What until the body can no longer feel the pain. Here I am on the other side, surrounded by voices of those who have died. The sounds of their cries engulfing me, but a cowling illusion cuts through them all.
Now, to be able to achieve that type of sound with my false chords, it took me years. So, whether Ben uses high-pitched fry screams or high-pitched false chord screams, both techniques can be used to achieve a very similar effect, which is why I don't think it matters too much. If you aren't very good at false chord screaming and you can't do high-pitched false chord screams, but you can produce a very similar effect with a high-pitched fry scream, then that is fine. And vice versa. If you're not good at fry screaming, but you've been practicing false chord screaming for a long time, and you can achieve that type of effect with your false chords, then do that. There comes a point when you can just generate so much distortion with either technique that at the end of the day, it just sounds like distortion, and the average person isn't really going to be able to tell. But if you have metal vocals OCD like I do, and you notice those patterns of pronunciation that people tend to develop with each technique, and you notice the slight nuances and differences in how each technique can sound, then go ahead and learn both techniques. Because ultimately that's just going to make you a better vocalist. But for the sake of Ben's highs, whether we're talking about his new style or his old style for doing highs, I think you can get really close with either technique, whether that's fry or false chord screaming. But the last thing I want to talk about is Ben's mid-ranged false chord screams. This is something that he hasn't really changed. He's kind of always done this. You can hear examples in Shadow of Intent's older stuff and their newer stuff.
The mad tyrant remains headstrong in his deceit, eluding the predators with grim intentions. Again, they've come to tear down our ideals with prestigious grins staring down at us.
Now that type of sound is what I call the gravelly voice. It's a false chord scream, but with less airflow, less effort. It's kind of like you're just speaking with your false chords. A really good way to find this is to practice throat singing with your false chords, and then just try to add a little bit more effort and air pressure.
What purpose have I on this damnable path? Captured in nebulous gaze, longing to feel the sun.
Well, this video ended up being a lot longer than I thought it was going to be, but if you're still here, then thank you. Hopefully this gave you a better understanding of how Ben screams, or just about metal vocals in general. My voice is super tired because I've been speaking for like 3 hours straight now. But if you like the way I teach metal vocals and you want to support my channel, well, please give a thumbs up, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.